Hi, everybody. Very happy to be live with Lesley Kelly. She's back.
I'm back. Sorry, just grabbing my lip salve. Ever the professional.
She hadn't abandoned us. You're going to start us off with an intro to yourself and your books, please.
Yeah, well, my name's Lesley Kelly. I'm the author of how many books now? 6 books now. I've written one standalone book set in the area of Edinburgh where I live. And I've got this as well, this beautiful rainbow of books here, which are my Health of Strangers series, which is a series of books set in Edinburgh against the background of a fictional killer pandemic. Which I started writing in 2016. And then obviously I've been overtaken by recent events. So the first 4 books in the series were written before the pandemic. And the last one, which comes out in July, Dead Man Driving, is the first one that's come out since we've actually had a pandemic. So that's me.
Did you watch the sort of news of the pandemic unfolding, having written The Health of Strangers, and be like, did I predict?
Well, when we first sort of heard about the pandemic, it was just this thing that was happening far distant over in China, and it was on the back of having had various pandemic scares that never turned into something. So, this could be quite good for selling books. There'll be a lot of stuff in the news about pandemics, and people will be interested. And then slowly it just kind of unfolded that this was going to be some really terrible global pandemic, which was actually, in some ways worse than what I had predicted, because in my books, I used Spanish flu as the basis for the virus that everybody suffers from. And Spanish flu took place in 1918. And it was terrible. Obviously we didn't have any modern medicine, all the things that we have now, and it just wiped out huge swathes of the population, killed more people than the First World War. But that being said, it was a flu virus, so people knew what they were dealing with. The virus, thinking back to the early days of coronavirus, we had no idea. Doctors really didn't know what they were dealing with and what effect it was going to have on people. And I suppose to an extent, we still don't know what kind of effect it's going to have on people. But in my books, I kind of guessed that if we did have this kind of virus, the way the government would respond is that they would set up some kind of system of mandatory testing. And the thought in the book is that everybody has to go for a monthly health check. And the health enforcement team that my books focus on are the people who come around and track you down if you haven't actually turned up for your health check. And most of the people that you can imagine don't turn up for these things are people with quite chaotic lifestyles, like, people with alcohol and drug issues. But because the Health of Strangers team is based in Edinburgh, they tend to deal with a lot of things that come out of like the Scottish Parliament. So they deal with a lot of cases that are to do with drug, sex, and rock and roll, and quite a lot of politics. So that makes it a little bit more interesting for them.
And it's almost like that. I was going to say there's a lot of parallels, isn't there, between like track and trace and the health?
Yeah, definitely track and trace. I got that right. With everybody in my books has a green card that tells them what their health status is, which was kind of like the vaccine passports. Predicted the stuff around hoarding. Then I predicted the stuff around, there being an increase in domestic violence and things if we had a lockdown, all that kind of stuff. Didn't predict anything like furlough. That would have just seemed, I think, a step too far. The idea that a government would have paid people just to stay at home and not go to work because there was a pandemic. And there was quite a lot of, in the books, there's quite a lot of bad behaviour by politicians. Quite a lot of things like them giving contracts to their mates and things like that. In my books, that's all done kind of behind the scenes, whereas in real life, I think there was some quite blatant bad behaviour by politicians, some of which is only coming out now. So it just goes to show that real life is always going to be stranger than fiction.
Which is interesting, isn't it? What is your standalone book about? Give us a bit of an introduction to that.
This was my first novel, and as with all first novels, I think it was quite autobiographical, drawing a lot on my knowledge of Edinburgh. So I live in a bit of Edinburgh called Trinity, which is down at the seafront. And in the area that I am, there's a lot of very old, very grand houses that were built by ship owners. And they have things like towers in them where the ship owners would sit and have a fine malt while watching their ships come into the harbour. And in a lot of these very old houses, there were sort of hidden rooms, and lots of theories why there were hidden rooms. Some theories that they were priests' holes, or that they were where you would put your men of seafaring age when the press gang was in town. But the actual most likely reason for them is that's where people were hiding their hooch when the guys that dealt with the duty that should have been paid on them. So a bit of smuggling and things going on. So for a writer growing up and looking at all these houses, obviously big old houses are very recurring theme in novels. So really interested in that. And then years ago, I entered the Scotsman short story competition, writing a story about a minor criminal called Stainsy, and really liked the character, him and his best friend Wheezy, and decided to extend what was a short story into a novel based around all these big old houses, and Stainsy, the main character in it, inheriting one of them, and then suddenly finding out that lots of people want to kill him because of that. And it kind of jumps between the present and going back in time. And Stainsy was, because it's my autobiographical first novel, is more or less exactly the same age as me. So it was a chance to sort of look back at Edinburgh and Leith, where my family's from, back in the 1980s and things. So it was a huge amount of fun to write. And I think it did quite well. It was longlisted rather, for the McIlvenney Awards, which is for the best Scottish crime novel. So that was a great way to start a writing career, being longlisted for a novel before I really knew what it was all about. But very fond of my first novel.
Well, I mean, you would be if it got you longlisted for a McIlvenney Award. They're great.
Yeah, I was in some very good company.
They always are with that list. Every year we've been interviewing the shortlisted authors for quite a while now, and every year it's one of those prizes where you never know who's going to win.
And they're always so varied. There's always a bit of historical, there's always a bit of police procedural, and there's always something really left field that you wouldn't have predicted. But it's great getting the publicity that you get when you're longlisted for an award. And one of the things I'm finding very difficult is when you write a book about a pandemic, and then there is a pandemic, is that how do you market that book? And in with the first couple of novels, because it was all fiction, then we had great fun kind of coming up with marketing stuff. And for the launch of The Health of Strangers, when we came to launch, I had a little pack on everybody's seat, and inside the pack there was a mask, and there were some surgical gloves and a little surgical wipe. And that was hilarious at the time, of course, before we actually lived through those things. And there's a picture of everybody that was at my launch. I got them to put on the gloves, and I got them to put on the masks, and they're kind of sitting there getting their pictures taken, all with these masks on. And then suddenly, a few years later, that would have been a crime, having all these people sitting in one room. And for the and later book I wrote was Death at the Plague Museum. So I invented an extra museum in Edinburgh, which we don't have, but the Edinburgh Museum of Plagues and Pandemics. So everybody got a little imaginary present from the gift shop at the museum, and this was a little bag of a pocket full of posies to ward off, bad diseases. But by the time we were getting to Death at the Plague Museum, the publisher, Sandstone Press, were also getting on board and playing around with it. And every time I have a book out, they give me a set of bookmarks to promote it. But the bookmark that we chose for Death at the Plague Museum had the book title, Death at the Plague Museum, on one side. And then if you flipped it over to the other side, it said, "The virus is spreading, don't get sick," which was funny at the time. I have to make very sure that I don't leave these lying around anywhere so that they accidentally get handed out at meetings or anything. Although, just as the pandemic was kind of kicking off, I did a presentation to the WRVS and said to them, "Oh, we've got these bookmarks, but they're really tasteless now." And they just kind of pushed me out the way to get hold of these, horrible bookmarks that they could take home and show to people. So they're a collector's item now, I think.
Yeah, I think people will go back to seeing them as a funny thing eventually, won't they? Now
we'll laugh about it one day.
Yeah, we're gonna. I mean, what happened to like sales during the pandemic of it? Because I know some people, like Patsy, for instance, one of our admins, read a lot more kind of pandemic books in the pandemic.
She has a pandemic shelf.
She has a pandemic shelf, yeah, I know. We've discussed it because I equally wasn't bothered and read books about them. But then I also read all the WHO files about the coronavirus because I'm a bit of a nerd.
It was quite mixed. I mean, we did see things like Camus, the plague. The sales of that went through the roof when the pandemic first hit, and I think some other authors that had pandemic things, like Station 11, I think all those kind of sold really well. And actually, my book, I think the publisher, as did many publishers, set up their own shop during the pandemic, and I think my books were one of the best sellers in that. And I have noticed I'm well aware that I am a niche. I'm not a police procedural that has a really wide readership. It's a bit more niche than that. But people that like that kind of thing really like that kind of thing. And whenever I do kind of, a talk, a book event or that, I tend not to sell a lot of books to a lot of people, but there's always somebody that comes along and thinks, oh, this is really my cup of tea, and buys the set. So all I need to do now is like work out who these readers are and where to find them and target my publicity to them. But that being said, Facebook isn't being very cooperative, because I tried to boost one of my posts, which was just really the blurb that was on the back of my book. And it banned me. It said, no, you can't do this because it's a social or political issue, and we don't boost those. And I'm thinking, considering all the horrible content you can find out there on Facebook, the thought that as an author I'm being censored, I find quite annoying.
I can imagine. What made you want to write the book? So, ignoring the fact that we've been through a plague or pandemic, because you were writing them before, what made you want to write them? What inspired it?
Yeah, well, I work in the third sector, and I work in a body that kind of represents all the third sector organisations, all the charities and community groups in a particular local authority area. And we spend a lot of time in meetings with people like the council and the police, the NHS, discussing various issues. And one of the things that we do is we plan for emergencies. And the kind of emergencies that we used to plan for were mainly around things like bad weather, we had the beast from the east. We were cut off by snow, so we planned for those kind of things, and we also planned for things like pandemics. But to be honest, it was a flu pandemic we were planning for, and the kind of plans were, well, what do we do if we can't get staff into things like hospitals and that? How would we cope with that? So that always struck me as quite interesting, and it was also interesting as well the different cultures between the different agencies. That there are bits of the health service that can be quite right on. And politically correct, and then you've got people like the police where they tend to have this very, very dark sense of humour. So when I was writing about the health enforcement team, I decided that they would all be seconded there, either from bits of the health service or from the police, so that there was this kind of immediate culture clash. The police as well being a very hierarchical institution, and people from the NHS and health promotion being a bit more used to being able to have their voice heard at work. But one of the other motivations was that quite often when you're watching TV dramas and that, I think the portrayal of frontline public sector staff can be quite stereotypical. There's always a horrible housing officer or, a terrible social worker or something. You think, well, actually working with these people, a lot of the time it's not like that. You've got people who are really doing their best under very, very difficult circumstances with limited resources. So I wanted to write something that kind of showed that side of things, of how people cope when they're in this impossible situation. And of course, because this, people were seconded to this, it wasn't a job that anybody really wanted to do, because, thinking a pandemic probably blows itself out in a year or two. Nobody wants to go and work there. It's not great for their career. So the health enforcement teams ended up having the staff basically that everybody else wanted to get rid of. It's a bit like Craggy Island is for priests. The health enforcement team is for naughty policemen and health professionals. So again, it was quite a lot of fun to write and just, put all these people in one room and think, how would they annoy each other on a day-to-day basis?
So knowing it was quite a niche, did you know it was going to be a niche thing when you were writing it, or?
I don't think I did think quite how niche it was going to be. This was before I really understood how marketing and things work. I think if I had known, I probably wouldn't have gone quite the way that I did, because it's quite difficult to market it. Is it a crime novel? Is it a speculative fiction novel? And the place you don't want to be is kind of like on the borders of two sets of fiction, because, readers know what they like, and, you need to be able to say, well, this is quite similar to something else. But I was very lucky because I had Ian Rankin read one of my books and gave me a quote for it, and he said the books were a bit like Mick Herron, who writes the Slough House books, which again are about a group of misfits who have ended up in a job that none of them want to be in. And then Mick Herron's been doing terribly well for himself recently, so I'm thinking, yes, I could be him if only somebody would pick up my books for television.
So, I mean, I think they're excellent books, but then I do like things that sit on that cusp of two types of fiction. I love speculative kind of crime and things like that as well. So there is an audience for it. There are
you are my readership. We need more of you.
Readership. Yeah, I absolutely am. You're 100% telling them to me. I love things like that. Just also have a weird fascination with things like viruses as well. So definitely.
Yeah, I got interviewed by the Bad Bugs Book Club. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they're based at Manchester University, and they're a group of microbiologists who read lots of books that are about bugs in kind of the widest sense. They read things that are about sort of pandemics and things, and also popular science books. And if you want to know more about books about viruses and things, they have on their website, they have a long sort of reading list of that. But it was their 10th anniversary or something that I was speaking at. There was a conference, and there was loads of them. I kind of went along with this quite blithely, and then sat down and thought, gosh, this is a room full of microbiologists which really know what they're talking about. And I'm here bluffing it as a member of the public that's written a book about this. But I think I got away with it. They didn't ask too many awkward questions.
I think yours are more about like the management of it though, aren't they, rather than the science.
Yeah.
And you have picked a kind of organism that would cause a pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, Spanish flu really was terrifying, and it behaved quite differently from with coronavirus. It was the people who are most affected are the people that you would have anticipated, the elderly, pregnant women, kind of people. But with Spanish flu, the way that people reacted to it was it completely overstimulated your immune system. So the people who were most likely to actually die from it were people with really strong immune systems, young and fit. And it was an absolute tragedy, because an awful lot of the people that died from it were things like soldiers coming back from the First World War, because it just rampaged around the barracks and because they were kind of at the peak of their fitness. So if you imagine coronavirus and then think how much more terrifying it would be if you were worried all the time about your teenage children being at risk from this. And the sort of theme of the first book is, all about the teenagers being most at risk, and of course teenagers being teenagers and reacting as they did to the idea of a lockdown and thinking, well, what would they do to subvert this? Because when you're 17, you think you're going to live forever, no matter what's happening in the world. So that was the theme of the first book.
Laura says she's intrigued. She loves speculative crime and quirky books, especially if there is dark humour.
Oh, there's a lot of dark humour. Yeah, there is. I'm the daughter of a policeman, and I think that's probably where the dark humour comes from. I think they're masters of it in that, as you would have to be, I think, to survive in that kind of environment.
Does that help you when you're writing stuff with the police kind of aspect in?
Well, my dad died about 15 years ago. So he would be in his 90s if he was still alive. So procedure would be pretty out of date. And certainly I think some of his attitudes were pretty out of date. But I do wish that I'd paid more attention, because your dad being your dad tells you all these anecdotes about things that happened at work. And you think, yeah, that probably never happened, Dad. But I wish I was paying more attention now, because I'm sure they would be really good to shoehorn into my books in some way.
But you knew things like the humour and things like that.
Yeah, and certainly through work, the frustrations of bureaucracy, and the difference between doing strategic stuff and doing operational stuff that people get really hung up on, and and who can do exactly what tasks and things. So yeah, I know all that.
I think that's possibly just a public sector kind of job thing, isn't it?
Yes, I think if you work in the public sector, you will very much recognise some of the frustrations in the book and the way people react.
So we've talked about the first one and death. What's the new book that's coming out in July about?
The new book, I am a bit Cassandra-like in predicting doom, because this one's all about food shortages. And it wasn't as kind of plucking that out of the air as it might seem, because at work we were doing lots of work around the impact that Brexit was likely to have on food security and food prices. So I just kind of, extrapolated the worst from that and thought the food prices would go through the roof, because there wouldn't be people around to be able to pick fruit and things from the fields, and all the prices would go up. But that, of course, was, hadn't anticipated the Ukraine war. Nobody anticipated that, and the impact that had on food prices, and the rampant inflation. Hadn't really anticipated that. And in the book, there's a plot point that they buy a sandwich from a touristy shop on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, and one of them comments about not getting much change from a tenner. And since I wrote the book, and the year or so it takes to actually get published, and I was thinking, oh, by the time this gets published, maybe it really will cost £10 to buy a sandwich from a shop on the Royal Mile. So however much I write things, real life seems to take it and run with it, and do it better than I've done it, or certainly more scarily than I've done it.
So what you're trying to tell us is that we need to stop you writing these kind of books and make you write really positive.
Yeah, and maybe even worse if I tried to write something positive, though. It might make something even worse happen than if I just,
So how long, you were saying it takes a while to come out. How long does it take from kind of writing to publication?
I think the couple of books in the middle, I was writing to particular dates. I was under contract to deliver them by a certain date. And I think it took me about 9 months in both cases to write them. And that was really kind of, took the date, how far away it was, how many days there were, and divided that by, 70,000 or 80,000 words that are in that, and worked out I needed to write 400 words a day, which is doable. Because I work more or less full time and got a couple of kids and elderly mother and things. So I'm definitely on the planner side of things. It's always a favourite question. Are you a planner, or do you fly by the seat of your pants? And I know that I'm going to have like 15 minutes at some point in the day to write my 500 words. So you've got to kind of know what it is that you're going to be sitting down and writing. So I plot them to the nth degree. Often that plot goes out of the plan goes out of the window halfway through, but I kind of need to know what I'm writing towards, because I just didn't have time to write 30,000 words and then think, well, actually, that's a bit of a plot cul-de-sac. I'm going to have to bin that. But I'm kind of, I just can't imagine what it works like when people just say, oh, I just take an idea and just like write it and see where it goes. I'm thinking, oh, no, I'd be worried all the time. Where's this going to go? What's it going to end? Who did it?
had a really interesting chat with Martin Edwards last month, I think. I've had a very busy month this month. And he was saying that he's friends with authors who say that they pants, they literally just make it up and they don't know what's happening. But he's like, actually, if you've written a number of books, you do know what you're writing. He's like, you do know your structure of your book in your head. So even if you're saying you're making it up, you are actually following.
Yeah. And I think there's not quite a template for crime novels, but there's certainly, certain things that have to happen in them. And I think because we all read so many crime novels, we kind of automatically write in a sort of pattern. But yeah, I like to know where I'm going, even though that changes considerably.
Laura said that prices went up when the Republic of Ireland changed to euros. Her dad went on for days about the cost of a Pope, whippy, ice cream and a cone. He'd have a fit at the prices now if he was still with us.
Oh, absolutely. You just couldn't have predicted how much things were going to go up over the past year. It's terrifying, really.
And I guess, really, like I was going to say, it must be hard to market and stuff working full time as well. It's quite hard to arrange, because authors can go and do like events and things like that, but it must be harder to work that around having a job.
Yeah, I mean, it is getting increasingly difficult. My job changed. I got promoted in the series of writing these novels. And then when we went on to hybrid working and trying to deal with COVID, it did get really difficult. You can kind of write a novel or you can do all the social media marketing, events and things, but finding the time to do both I found really, really challenging. So it's great that I can do things like this. I think book clubs like yours are really, really great for allowing authors to connect with readers. And I think that's probably the only wonderful thing that came out of COVID is that we are all so much better at using, online resources now, using Zoom and Teams and things like this to connect.
Yeah, having said that, I kind of hate Zoom and Teams, but I think that's probably a leftover from having to work from home with them.
Yeah, because you've gone full circle, haven't you? You've had a in-person event now, so.
We've had an in-person event, and I don't have a job that's hybridable, really, or work from homeable, even though we did in lockdown, and I'm just terrible at it. I can't work from home. Like, it's really bad.
Yeah, I have a couple of days from working from home, and then after that, I'm quite itchy and think, I'd quite like to go and see people again, and.
Oh, it's not the people. I'm quite antisocial. I'm okay with the sociable thing of being at home, like and just talking to like my partner. It's I can either be really productive or really unproductive, and there's no in between. So it's either like loads of work in an hour or nothing all day.
Yeah. I think writing's a bit like that. I think if I never had a deadline for novels, it would be a bit, yeah, you need something that really forces you to think, I've got to, it's like when you've only got a short amount of time, you need something that makes you sit down and write.
Your job must really help though in the other way, because like you said, you're getting so many ideas from it because of what you're doing.
Yeah, I suppose I'm a little bit paranoid that I accidentally use a name or something of somebody that I've come across at work, or use something that's deep in my subconscious but is actually a bit too true to life. So yeah, I do have to kind of put it through the prism of this is an imaginary world and this is the way things are done there. But the people that I work beside are always very keen to come along to my launches and things. I think just to check out that I haven't actually used any of them in my books. Any thinly disguised versions of them, which I've not, but it has been quite good sitting in some really boring, annoying meetings and thinking, yeah, you're annoying me so much, I'm going to go home and I'm going to murder you later. I'm going to call you something different, but you're going to be in a book and you're going to be dead.
Does anyone like appeal to you to be in the books? Because quite often people like to be.
Yeah, a few people have said to me, "Oh, I'd be quite happy you want to use me, go ahead and use it." Yeah, but I've steered clear of that. Yeah, try to keep a some clear blue water between real life and the books. But as you say, real life keeps like catching up and jumping on my bandwagon. So who knows? I might write it and it might just come true.
So you've got, I mean, hold up the rainbow pile of those again, because there's quite a few in the series, isn't there?
Yeah, that's number 5, just coming out now. But they are a thing of beauty. They were recovered. This wasn't the way they looked originally. For the first 2 books, actually, they came out with much sort of darker ones, more similar to my first novel. But then as they went on, they were becoming less sort of pure crime and more kind of conspiracy and thriller and like I say, sort of lots of thrillers are about sort of the politics of it all. So the publishers decided that it was appropriate to give them a slightly different cover to reflect that.
Yeah, I'm a chunk of the way into Death at the Plague Museum at the moment.
Oh, right, okay.
I do want a Plague Museum to exist, though.
Yeah, the Plague Museum was so much fun because I got to make up a museum from scratch and think about what, you know, if you were having a museum that was dedicated to viruses, what would actually be in it. So there were lots of, you know, monkeys and chickens and, you know, things that spread diseases. And a plague doctor stuff, you know, the big sort of comedial dart with the big sort of those things on it. So when my sons were younger and more malleable, I got them both to dress up, one as a gorilla and one as a plague doctor for one of my launches. But they're a bit too old to be bribed now to do things like that.
The Science Museum in London has exhibits that have things like, you know, like little vaccine kits that we use to inoculate for smallpox.
Yeah.
In their exhibits. And they had a whole thing about COVID and like the vaccine, including like the whole genetic code of the virus.
Yeah. That was one of the issues for me was around the vaccine was I kind of naively thought, oh, I can't talk about a vaccine in my books because if you had a vaccine, that would just bring all this to an end. You know, you know, the virus wouldn't exist anymore. And I also thought with viruses, I was thinking like chicken pox is a virus and you can only ever get that once in your life. So I thought, well, my vaccine, my virus in this book, you're going to get it once and then you're going to be immune to it. So immediately you set up this kind of society where you've got kind of 2 tiers. You've got people who have had the virus and are now immune to it, like everybody works in the health enforcement team and aren't really bothered because they know they're not going to get it again. These other people who are still terrified because, you know, they don't know how they're going to react if they do get it, whether their immune system will be overstimulated and they'll die. So I think museums are really interesting, and it will be interesting to look back on this in 5 years' time and think, oh yeah, I remember that when we had that lockdown, and remember those signs that were up everywhere, and you know the things outside supermarkets that you had to stand back and things. So, but already I think I'm starting to forget what actually happened in the early days of COVID.
I think that's the thing. When we went around to the exhibition about it, we were like, it did remind you of things that happened. But yeah, and they had like, it was really interesting.
Yeah.
But I was meant to be taking pictures of like sensible things though, and I was going back there and I'm not sure that like the pictures I was meant to be taking included the entire genetic code of like COVID. We have got some more hellos. Oh, it's Patsy. She says you were ahead of your time.
Oh, are we?
She's a big fan, Patricia, isn't she, of your books?
She's probably heard all these jokes before, so.
Have you got any? Because I know Patsy's a great supporter of like book events in Scotland. Have you got any book events coming up?
Well, we're still trying to work on the launch for it. Waiting to hear what the publishers are suggesting. The book comes out at the end of July, hoping to have a launch a little bit later in the year, just to let everybody, all the kids go back to school so that the people are back off their holidays. So we'll probably try and do something in August for that, and hopefully do some book festivals or something like that. yeah, after COVID, I feel I'm a bit out of the habit of going to things like that. But it's nice to see them all back and running again. And it'd be nice to bump into some other authors as well, because it's been a while since I've seen everybody.
And book festivals for crime fiction are always like the nicest things, aren't they?
Oh,
Like
yeah. Yeah, I mean, crime fiction authors are just lovely. You know, I don't know if all authors are lovely. Maybe romance authors are horribly bitchy or something, but certainly the crime writers I've met are all been very, very supportive of each other. So.
I've only ever met crime or sci-fi authors, and they're always nice.
Yeah.
I can't talk about anyone else. Patsy says there's her next party in September.
She said what, sorry?
She said her next party is in September.
Oh, well, maybe I'll make that one. I've not made any of them yet, so.
Well, you're local, aren't you? And you've got loads of good book festivals in Scotland for when you can get out.
Yeah, there's a really good a good selection of them, and the big ones are great, but the little ones are, you know, I've been to some really, really nice ones, like the Nairn Festival and the Inverness one. They're just really lovely.
I need to get up and do like Bloody Scotland.
Oh, you do, yeah.
But all the bits that I want to do are kind of midweek when it's like work time. You know,
Yeah.
the torchlight procession.
Oh, yeah. I've not done that myself, but it does look fabulous.
It does. It looks like a lot of fun, doesn't it? It's like someday.
Yeah, I think it's quite a drunken festival, though, from what I remember. Like, there's a lot of after-hour drinking. Yeah, Harrogate as well. You know, the year I did Harrogate, we were outside in a tent. I don't know if they've moved back indoors, but yeah.
They moved out to tents more in the pandemic. So, or the bit of the pandemic that I managed to go because I got pinged one time and couldn't go to. Well, I didn't get pinged because I never had the app, but I got like work pinged.
Yeah, one of the authors did. The year that I did Harrogate was sort of the year of COVID, and one of the authors got pinged on the train on the way to it and just had to turn around and go back. And yeah, so these are the kind of things we're forgetting already, the impact it had on everyday life.
Yeah, I had tickets to go to the literature festival last year and got COVID and couldn't. I thought it was magical. I'd managed for like 2 years. It's like
it's still out there. It's still getting people even now.
Yeah, true. Do you have an idea of how many? So you've got quite a chunk of books already. Do you have an idea where it's going to go? Have you got an end in sight for them?
I've started writing the next one after this one, so about 20,000 words into that. I am starting to think about, how do we wrap this up? Because it is a pandemic and, you know, can't keep it going endlessly. So starting to think about how we sort of wrap it up. So maybe another couple of books and then that'll be me done, I think, with this particular series.
Well, the disease will eventually become endemic, won't it? Or like it'll.
Yeah, we'll just learn to live with it.
They just become part of life. Yeah. Lesley says, "How is Bernard?"
Bernard's okay. He's okay. He's yes, he had very high ethical standards when he started, but I've noticed that he's drinking a bit more than he was, and his personal life is a bit of a disaster in this book. Basically, because he can't say no to anybody. So you know, he's got a lot of women in his life that he should really learn to stand up to. And he's also, you know, starting to think about himself and starting to feel a bit of fear about being in the job. So yeah, so he's been better, I have to say.
So once you've finished off the series, I mean, we're not rushing you. They're a good series. But have you got any ideas of like what you would write after that? Do you got ideas for like any standalones or?
Oh no, I don't actually know what I'll do next. think I need a little rest and then maybe wait for inspiration to hit me. But yeah, definitely still be something in the crime genre.
It's all good news. If you did get like an adaptation of because people do like adaptations of like pandemic kind of style things, don't they? Think about Contagion really well in the pandemic again, didn't it? It's a movie.
Yeah.
Everyone was watching it. If it was made into like a movie or a Netflix series, what kind of role would you like to play in it?
Oh, that's a very good question. I've got no acting skills whatsoever, so I'd have to be person typing in the background or dead body or something like that. Yeah, I think I could just about act a dead body. I think I'd be all right with that. But yeah, got no acting skills, no acting desires at all, really.
You just have to cameo in as something, then make it
Yeah,
like a Hitchcock moment.
um, like Colin Dexter, the author of Inspector Morse, he was a cameo in every episode of it, so I could be that person that's just there in the background.
Or Stan Lee in every Marvel movie.
Yeah. So it could be like spot Lesley Kelly. She'll be in here somewhere.
It'd be good fun. I think people would get behind that.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this is Patsy. She said you did stand-up comedy. You can do it.
Yeah. I haven't done stand-up comedy for a very long time, but yes, I probably could, but not acting.
Tell us a bit about your stand-up comedy.
Something that I always really liked stand-up comedy, and never really gave much thought as to how you became a stand-up comedian until I worked beside somebody that did stand-up comedy. And he said, "Oh, I just I went on this workshop and then just went and did it." And I thought about that, and then I saw the Stand in Edinburgh as part of the Leith Festival, were advertising, "Come along and try yourself out at stand-up comedy." And I thought, well, there's not really any reason not to. It sounds completely terrifying, but you want to do this, so come on, just man up and get yourself on stage. And I did it. We went and we did about 3 days practicing for this, and then the finish of the week, you did your thing at the festival, and the audience was entirely full of sort of friends and family of the people who'd been on the workshop. So it's the kind of friendliest crowd you could ever imagine. We were being cheered to the rafters, by all these people. So that was great. And then pretty quickly after that, the Stand encouraged us all to go and do their open mic nights. So we did a few of those. And then you kind of progress on, the better you get it, the nearer you get to headlining on a Saturday night. But I got as far as being kind of bottom of the bill on a Friday night, a Saturday night, and it was absolutely fine, sort of at the Stand in Edinburgh. But then they said, "Oh, could you come through and do a weekend in Glasgow?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, happy to do that." And then got there and realised that the Stand in Glasgow is twice the size of the one in Edinburgh. And my first night there, sort of, it's full, absolutely full. 200 drunk Glaswegians, and got up on stage and said, "Hello, my name's Lesley. I'm from Edinburgh," and everybody booed. The lifelong rivalry between Edinburgh and Glasgow. So once you've been booed by 200 drunk Glaswegians, you're pretty good to do any kind of work meeting without having too many nerves. So
that's a good story.
Yep, definitely character building.
Does that background help you with the bits of humour in the books?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly my first book, looking back on it now, it was just like a string of jokes and set pieces with a loose bit of, plot kind of connecting them. And certainly I do think of good jokes and think, oh yeah, I'm going to shoehorn that in somehow or other. Which is probably not the best way to write. And, I'm sure my editor can spot when I've done that. But yeah, I whatever I write next, it'll probably be crime, but it'll definitely still be black humour. Yeah.
But I think those two things go together because, like you said, people who work in things like the police have that kind of humor.
So I mean, it's definitely a coping mechanism.
Yeah, so it's very real to kind of write that into the books.
Yeah,
doing it.
I think it's also me as well, though, because you spend so long with the characters in the book and just thinking, some of my fellow crime writers that write really, really dark novels about things like child abuse and that. I think I just wouldn't want to be in my head with all that for that length of time. Kudos to them for doing it. But if I'm going to be there, I want to be able to crack jokes and things as well.
But you've lived in your head in a pandemic for longer than any of us have done.
I was phenomenally well prepared for a pandemic, sort of both mentally and practically. I'd thought through how we would react to all this, knew what to do, and psychologically I was there.
You did better than me, who actually studied things like that at university and prepared for the pandemic by buying some board games.
Did you buy Pandemic?
No, I've got Plague Inc., which is better because you play as
right, okay, yeah.
You play as a virus and try and take over. But no, with that is literally our preparation was to buy some board games. We're going to be in the house.
Yep, you're going to bunker down. You need some entertainment.
We didn't hoard any food or anything in, just board games.
Yeah. No. My husband took over doing the shopping and bought lots of strange things back that I think we've only just stopped using our Passata mountain that he came back with from the shop. So there's definitely something in the male psyche about going to prepare for my family, going to provide for them. They're going to eat pasta and spaghetti and tomato sauce for however long this takes.
Forever.
Oh, I'm seeing Pat's just saying she's still got her lavender bag. Yeah, that was my little from the Plague Museum. Yeah.
It's a good idea. I like that. I guess and the packs you were saying that had the mask and the gloves and the wiping. I think it's a really good, innovative way of marketing your things. You're saying that you don't have the time to do it, but then actually some of the things you've done are really clever.
Yeah, I'm a bit scared to do any fancy marketing now. I don't quite know what we'll do at the launch. It might be a bit more low key, but for the very first book, The Health of Strangers, one of my friends is a chef, and he created a whole load of sort of pandemic themed nibbles. We were drinking soup out of syringes and eating little cakes out of petri dishes and things. So yeah, so we were very inventive then, back when it was funny to do that kind of thing.
I think there's still fun in eating things out of petri dishes.
Yeah, maybe we're getting to the point where we can laugh at it now.
Yeah, you can definitely do food out of petri dishes now. I fed my kids some chocolate buttons out of a petri dish the other day at school. So totally fine. That was Patricia with the lavender bag.
Yep.
So what have you read this year that you've enjoyed? I've not asked you that question yet, and it's my favourite one.
Oh, right. Well, I'm in the middle of several series. Well, I've just finished the Oscar de Muriel series, which was set in the 1800s, I think, Frey and McGray. So there were about 6 or 8 books in that. So saw that through from beginning to end. So very disappointed. Well, disappointed I've finished that now. You're really enjoying the series. And I am working my way through The Vinyl Detective. I don't know if you've read any of his books.
I haven't heard of them.
It's as it sounds, it's a man that hunts out rare vinyl for people. But somehow these things inevitably turn out to be a bit murderous, and he goes to somebody's house and they've been murdered, and it's all because of this record. And each book has become kind of a different era of music. So they're really inventive and very, very funny. So really like those. And what else? The other series I'm working my way through is a zombie one, which again is I think comes under the heading of Plague, by Charlie Higson, who was on the Fast Show. Has written sort of this young adult series about a plague that kills everybody over the age of 14. So the only people that are left, so it's all about Lord of the Flies, the only people that are left are young teenagers. So working my way through that, and they're all set in London, and all the kids have taken over places like the Natural History Museum and Buckingham Palace and the Tower of London. So very much enjoying those. And the other series that I'm working my way through very slowly because I don't want to get through them too fast is the Sue Grafton novels, the alphabet murders, which I just love. And I can't quite put my finger on it why I like them so much, but I think it's just they're so different, set in really hot bit of California and set in the 1980s before mobile phones. So she has all these plots that, you can write now because a lot of them would be resolved with one phone call to the police from wherever she's been shut in, locked in a warehouse or something, so this has been a year of serials for me.
I think this again, as Patricia says, she's got Oscar de Mural's last on her table.
Yeah, it's that thing, it's one of these ones that every book's self-contained, but there was also an overarching story arc that got resolved in the last book. So yeah, so kind of wanted to read it to know what happens and kind of didn't want it to be over.
I have one of his books in my book pile and I've not read it yet, but I think it's one of the later ones.
So I think it's one of these ones that's worth reading in order. Yeah.
We'll go back and try and read them in order, maybe.
Yeah. My favourite one out of all of them was he did one that was set in the Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh, all to do with a production of Macbeth. And it had a mixture of sort of real people in it from the time. The guy that wrote Bram Stoker that wrote Dracula was one of the characters in it. So loved it.
One of my current favourite series is the Edinburgh Night series by T.L. Huchu. They're slightly dystopic Edinburgh.
Oh. Edinburgh attracts a lot of dystopic novels, I think. It's yeah.
But these are more like they're magical, like the character can talk to ghosts and things, but they're like on the urban fantasy.
Oh, I do like a bit of urban fantasy, so yeah.
Things, if you know what I mean. There's like hints of crime and stuff, but it's very, very proper urban fantasy, but they're really good.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. Just went to see him at a literature festival.
What was his name?
T.L. Huchu. I'm just looking if I can find the.
Oh yeah. I've seen them in Waterstones.
Yeah, he's really. Just knocked over my book pile finding it.
Oh no!
But that's the first.
Oh yeah. That's definitely looking familiar. I will check those out.
They're great. I got the first one. I knew my first one was there because I took it with me to the. Still books falling over.
Oh no, live on camera, you're going to be buried under an avalanche.
I'm not going to be buried under an avalanche, although my husband does say that's the way we're going to die.
Worst ways to go.
But yeah, there is I had it out to go and get them signed at book festival because I was like, really, really good series. Patricia's saying I'd like the Oscar de Muriel ones.
Yeah.
And someone else is saying they like this one. It's a good story. God save the king, long may he reign. That's what they say to each other.
Ah, right.
As like part of the discussions. Patricia asked if you're going to the Edinburgh Book Festival at all.
I haven't actually looked at the programme. It's been a busy week, but I'm pretty sure I will be there and checking out the crime. I do like to go and support my fellow crime writers. I like to go and see the crime. I'd also quite like to go and see a bit of poetry if I can at it, because I'm always amazed at the Edinburgh Book Festival that some things have queues round the block for it. And, inevitably when you work out what it is, it'll be like a cookery book or it'll be something like military history, which I would never in a million years read, but are really, really popular. And then you have some of the crime things and some of the poetry things actually are half full. And you think, it's a real shame, that come to Edinburgh and not get an audience. So I do like to go along and see what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's good when there are mixed festivals, but it does run that risk then, doesn't it, of people not not drawing that kind of really specific audience for a thing. So people
I think, yeah, there's so much, and the fringe and the festival and the book festival all sort of overlapping. There's so much going on that it is a struggle for everybody to get an audience. But
and it's
and if you've been on the telly, you get an audience. So or if you've been in the newspapers, you get an audience. So it's.
I don't know. I try to when I go to them, I try and go to the things that just interest me, rather than necessarily things that I've heard of. So I would look at like the book titles and the like the panel titles and things, and go off the themes rather than whether I'd heard of the author. That wouldn't really worry me. I'm quite happy to go and discover a new person.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way of finding things out. Especially if you hit a panel up and there's like a couple of people on it, and then you discover someone new as well. That can be a really good thing. Patricia's saying she's there most days, so text her for coffee.
Will do.
You can't, I mean, that would cheer up your day, couldn't it? You can't spend time around Patsy and not be happy.
Yep. I think I owe her a coffee because she does so much for Scottish writers. We should be taking it in turn to take her out for coffee while we're there.
She's just a legend in general. She does so much for everybody. Part of the reason why my book pile has just collapsed is that she came down for our live event and inundated. I got a big pile of books from her that are like on the side to read. I think I just dislodged about 3 or 4 of them. Looking for my other book. Yeah, so she's gonna have a big yellow bag and t-shirt. She'll be easy to find. She's normally very
and some bookmarks, probably.
Bookmarks, yeah, she's got pens now as well.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, check that out.
We sent her back from Leeds with extra things to give away because she had an empty bag. Bringing all her like Scottish treats south of the border to us, which is amazing. When I was looking on your website, it said you got a free story.
There is a free story. If you go on, it's there just to download from Amazon. Download it for free. Do check it out. See, I'll give you a flavour of the characters, see if it's your kind of thing. Try before you buy.
I think, yeah, it's a good way. I'm sorry, the reason I mention it is if anyone's watching and hasn't read your books, it might be a good way to discover them. I had quite a happy time looking at the website of you showing like the other things. Like that's why I knew the Plague Museum didn't exist, because you'd put about it.
Yeah, these would be the exhibits if it existed. Yeah.
You said there was a Spotify list coming on yours. Do you have like a list of music to go with?
No, I have never got round to that. But the second book in the series was called Songs by Dead Girls. So in the kind of run up to that, I got everybody I knew, other authors and things, to give me suggestions of songs by female singers who were no longer with us that we should be celebrating. So there was a Spotify list for that. With a very, very varied playlist of women who are no longer with us and some fantastic songs. So I would check that out on Spotify.
Yeah. I always think that's really interesting when you have like extra aspects for stories, like Spotify lists or, things like the bits on the website like you have about the museums, or people who put pictures of locations on that they've used. I always think that's a really extra interesting thing to go and look at, because not everyone is familiar with Edinburgh or wherever the books are set.
Yeah, I do like after you've read a book, if you really, really like a book and read it, and you just want something else, don't you, just to keep it going. And
yeah, it's quite nice. We have 2 minutes left. So remind everyone what they are going to go away and buy.
Right. Well, if you're new to the series, you're going to look for the Health of Strangers. That's the first in the series. And then you've got another 4 coming after that. If you're up to date, the next one that's coming out is Dead Man Driving, be out at the end of July. And if you're thinking, I love the sound of a bit of black humour, but I really can't bear anything to do with a pandemic. That's my standalone one, set in Edinburgh, fine house in Trinity. Something for everybody.
Something for everybody. I am about a quarter of the way into Death at the Plague Museum.
Oh, right.
This week, so I'm catching up.
Excellent.
Laura says Chris Brookmeyer has a Spotify playlist for the Cliff House. It was good and linked to the plot, and she's going to be checking out your books.
Oh, fabulous.
Which is really good to hear, isn't it? That's what you want when we're finishing a chat. Someone saying they're going to go.
Absolutely. So, yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me in this, and thank you for all you do for authors. As I say, it's great that you provide this link where we can talk directly to people. The people who write crime, we talk directly to people who like reading it. So thank you.
You are more than welcome, and you are welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
Right, we're offline.